Today we're going to be doing a review and discussion for a Canticle for Liebowitz, and we're actually going to start this video out with 3 fun factoids to grab your attention and get you interested about this science fiction masterpiece. The first fun fact is that this book helped inspire the popular Fallout video game, and this fun factoid is evident from the very start of the book. The second fun fact is that this book has one of the best magical/science fiction libraries I've ever seen in fantasy or science fiction. It's got a post-apocalyptic archive of artifacts designed to preserve human knowledge. And the third fun fact is that this book is so incredible, it has never been out of print since it was first published in 1959. We're also going to do something else a little different, something interesting and fun, by showing you a contrast between 2 covers of this book. And I think the difference between these covers help portray a really important aspect of the book itself. In this first cover, we see a lone monk in the desert, a barren landscape, and honestly, it's a cover devoid of color or excitement. It doesn't tell us much about the book. And honestly, if I was just to pick up a book by its cover, this doesn't make me want to pick it up. This isn't interesting to me and not exciting. The second cover is dark. It's got these blood red accents. There's a religious figure with a staff in front and center of the cover. In the back, we can see the desert landscape mixed with towering buildings, flying objects, and some sort of flowing mosaic type thing up above. It's got this ominous dark while somehow futuristic, dystopian type feel to it. And I wanted to point out this contrast because it's crazy that 2 covers that are so different contain the same book. And the important part about these differences is that even though these covers are so starkly opposite of each other, they each portray a different part of the book in partiality. Neither is an inaccurate reflection of the stories you're going to find inside. As we go through a Canticle of Leibowitz, we kind of start with this light-hearted, humorous tone with the monk in the desert. But by the end, we are in this dystopian sci-fi with a darker tone, and you end up contemplating the meaning of life. So now that I've hopefully grabbed your attention with those fun factoids and a discussion about the cover, today we're going to be doing a spoiler-free review and discussion of A Canticle for Liebowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. And I'd like to start my reviews out with a short summary of the book, and this one can be best described as a post-apocalyptic science fiction broken down into 3 parts: Fiat Homo, Fiat Lux, and Fiat Voluntas Tua. I know I probably butchered those pronunciations. But each part of this book was originally published as a separate short story in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. This book follows humanity as it fights for survival after the feared nuclear apocalypse of the Cold War becomes a reality. We're following the Earth as it's reborn from nuclear fire. This first book, Fiat Homo, starts with a story of a monk trying to help canonize the patron of his abbey, Leibowitz. He's trying to canonize him in the Catholic faith as a saint, all while performing the abbey's main mission in this world, which is to seek out knowledge of the past and store it for safekeeping. This first part is essentially what is represented in that first cover I showed you, but it's got a more lighthearted and fun feel to it than what the cover portrays. Part 2 of this book follows that same abbey hundreds of years into the future as people start becoming more familiar with science and start seeking out knowledge. Luckily, they discover that the church has devoted the past several hundred years to this purpose. And now that they're learning the scientific process, they're finding values in these books that the church has just spent hundreds of years storing, preserving. And lastly, part 3 follows these same people who have hundreds of years into the future, even from there, and they have entered the space age. They're to the point where they're beyond where we are now. They are interplanetary. They travel between planets, and we watch how they navigate this new technology, all these different societies merging together as they come again to arms. And I really wanted to start this video off with those fun factoids and the fun cover discussion, because if I was to start off with a summary, it doesn't sound the best to a lot of people. You might listen to this summary and think like, oh, that sounds like a really boring book I'm not interested in. And you would be terribly wrong, because I have never seen someone able to take such an accurate description of what happens in libraries and turn it into a page turner. And don't get me wrong, if I heard someone describe the plot of this book, I too would think this book sounds boring. But I would have been completely wrong. The book is incredible in the fact that it is somehow able to span thousands of years within only a few hundred pages, while somehow keeping you oriented, interested, and entertained at the same time. For fans of Brandon Sanderson, it would be like fitting all three eras of Mistborn into a single book. We get a pre-industrial kind of medieval era, we get an upcoming industrial era, and then we get a futuristic era. But Miller does an even better job with this book than Sanderson does with Mistborn. And yeah, I know that's controversial. Mistborn is the favorite for a lot of people out there, but this book beats Mistborn by a long shot. It is that good. And it's so crazy that I never knew this book existed until recently. And maybe I was living under a box or something, because apparently this book has been considered one of the all-time greatest classics for a long time now. I had mentioned at the beginning of the video that this book has never been out of print since first being published in 1959. Or maybe I did hear it and I just purged it from my mind, because a book about monks in a library doesn't sound like something exciting to me. It has never sounded like something I wanted to read. And honestly, the only reason I picked it up is I'm going to give a shout out to Christopher Rocchio, because he guided me to this book. I can't remember what video he was discussing it in, but he's the one that mentioned it and ultimately led me to this book's discovery. So as much as I give Empire of Silence a hard time for being a less than average read, Rocchio and I have very similar tastes when it comes to what we enjoy in our books. But back to A Canticle for Liebowitz, I want to discuss something that's a little bit off key which is montages. And you all know what I mean. It's Rocky putting in a week or two of hard training and ends up winning the championship at the end. Or movies or books that you read that portray somebody going to study in a library, reading, learning all these cool magical spells that make them the most powerful person ever, and just gives them the ability to defeat everyone. And I love montages. I do. They make you feel good and motivated, like you can do anything. Rocky's montage is one of my favorites ever. But I feel like they also set people up for failure, because the theatrical version of study montages is very misconstruing. They make it seem like you can cram and get great results, that you can achieve greatness with short spurts of hard work. And then they over-exaggerate the power that you can get from libraries. Like, we create this false expectation. In reality, libraries are a place of quiet study and hard work. With the little bit of knowledge you gain from hours and hours and hours of studying, it's no great magical spell. Instead, it's a little tidbit of knowledge that is really only applicable or powerful in very specific circumstances. So the truth behind libraries would not make a good story without making it a type of montage. So the fact that A Canticle for Liebowitz takes an accurate portrayal of studying, of life in a library or archive, it should be the most boring and dry book imaginable. And yet, for me at least, the plot of this book is written with a prose so succinct and precise, so beautiful, while exploring themes so deep that I never got bored while reading this book. I honestly haven't had such a page turner since I read A Rage of Dragons. And for those that don't know what that is, A Rage of Dragons is like complete opposite of A Canticle for Liebowitz. It's almost like 100% action with swords from the start to finish, while A Canticle for Liebowitz has zero action and is set in a Catholic monastery. So yeah, there's a little bit of a difference in plot, but the attention I had, the amount I was like pulled into the story, it was about the same. It's a true testament to Miller's writing skill and the story he tells within. Something else interesting about just how talented Miller was as a writer with this book is the fact that he was able to make me think so deeply about like hard subjects of life without taking me out of the story. I read A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court last year or the year before, I think, and one of my biggest complaints about that book was that it made me think so much that it repeatedly took me out of the story. And it was hard for me to understand why this bothered me at the time, because I couldn't identify why it was kicking me out of the story, because I love books that make me think. I love books like that. But this book helped me understand, and I think it has to do with Tolkien's opinion of detesting allegory and how people don't understand the difference between allegory and applicability. In books like Canticle game, the authors are trying to use their fantasy to retell known stories their own way. They are using allegory. Those books are allegory. A Canticle for Liebowitz, it's not trying to tell anyone's story, except for the one that he is trying to tell. He's trying to tell the story of the characters within his book. He's not trying to convince you of anything. He is trying to tell a story and make you ponder. And 2 or 3 different readers can come to 2 or 3 different conclusions about what the story is saying. His story is at least partially applicable to all of us. It's absolutely incredible. And before I move on to the discussion about a Canticle for Leibowitz, I am going to just quickly review like the characters and world building of this book, because when I entered this story, I knew absolutely nothing about it besides the little that Christopher Rocchio mentioned in the video. So imagine my surprise when I open the book and within the first few pages, I immediately think to myself, this feels like Fallout. And no, the plot is nothing like the video game. It's the feeling of Fallout is more the vibes of the game, the vibes of the book. It's the post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear war setting, and then even some of the humor is very, very similar to what you find in the video game. So imagine my surprise when after finishing the book and I'm looking things up about it, that I was like, I had that aha moment. When I was like, no, this is a known fact. The people who created Fallout were inspired by a Canticle for Liebowitz. This book doesn't just feel like Fallout, it inspired Fallout. Especially the Brotherhood of Steel, whose mission is to preserve and collect knowledge of pre-war technology. But also just the general humor and mutants and ghouls and all that other stuff too is inspired by this book. Fallout 2 even includes a cut location where you can find an abbey with monks that preserve pre-war knowledge. And I know these sound like just cool little factoids, but it just goes towards the world building in this book. Like, it didn't feel like a silly little post-apocalyptic world. It was an amazing post-apocalyptic world. And I really hate to keep ranting on about this because I don't want people to pick this book up expecting the Fallout video game. I don't want them to expect that setting throughout the entirety of the book, because I really got that feel mainly at the beginning and then like parts of the middle. And they're not going to get the excitement or adventure that they get out of the Fallout video games either. The book is none of those things. The book is literally just about monks in an abbey preserving knowledge in a rapidly changing world. It's about the cyclical nature of time and about humanity itself. But the characters are so well written and the world is so amazingly built that I can't help but build this book up to almost unrealistic expectations. Like, if I had to make a list of books that are just better than all the others, I would put books like Book of the New Sun, WizardKnight, the entirety of Middle-earth, Harry Potter, Dune, and a Canticle for Leibowitz. Like, that is how much I love this book. So now that I'm moving on to the discussion portion of the book, I'm going to end the review portion by just giving this book 5 out of 5 stars and recommending it for people who, one, like books that make you think. If you like books that make you think, pick this book up, make this book your next read. The second type of person I recommend this book for is if you're religious and looking for a science fiction or a fantasy book that challenges some of your beliefs, pick this book up. Also, if you're not religious and you're looking for a great philosophical book, pick this book up. Seriously, this book is for everyone. And number 3, if you want to read the classics of science fiction, books that like are known and are classics of the genre, pick this book up. It's a staple. Okay, now on to the discussion. This part won't be as long, and much of it is honestly just stuff you can learn on the internet, like Wikipedia or Goodreads, and I'm just doing the legwork for you up front. And typically I discuss different aspects of the book in these discussion portions, like some sort of philosophical aspect or something I really enjoyed about it. But this one's going to go a little different. And it's funny because this would be the perfect book to discuss some of the philosophical aspects of the book. But this discussion section is essentially just going to be about the author, because his story is wild. And if you're watching this and have already read the book, Hearing his story is going to make you rethink the book in its entirety and probably make you want to reread it. And if you haven't read the book yet, just pay attention, because it adds a whole nother depth to the story that you will hopefully be reading soon. Miller was born in Florida, educated at the University of Tennessee and the University of Texas, and worked as an engineer later on. But none of that is the important part. The next part is where things get interesting and honestly kind of tragic. During World War II, he served in the Army Air Corps as a radio man and tail gunner, flying more than 50 bombing missions over Italy. He took part in the bombing of the Benedict Abbey at Monte Cassino, which proved a very traumatic experience for him. Joe Haldeman reported Miller had PTSD 30 years before it ever had a name. After the war, the experience of bombing the church helped lead Miller to convert to Catholicism. And this is where things get even more interesting, because between 1951 and 1957, Miller published over 36 science fiction short stories, winning a Hugo Award in 1955 for the story Darfstellar, and also wrote scripts for the television show Captain Video in 1953. But then, late in the 1950s, Miller assembled a novel from 3 closely related novellas that he had published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction in 1955, 1956, and 1957. The novel was entitled A Canticle for Liebowitz, and it was published in 1959. And it was a huge success. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that after the success of A Canticle for Liebowitz, Miller never published another new novel or story in his lifetime, although several compilations of his earlier stories were issued in the years later. In Miller's later years, he became a recluse, avoiding contact with nearly everyone, including family members, and never even allowed his literary agent, Don Congdon, to meet him. And this is where everyone who has read A Canticle for Liebowitz or is Catholic will have their mind blown. This is where the tragedy sets in. Miller struggled with depression during his later years, but he had managed to complete a nearly 600-page manuscript for the sequel to Canticle before taking his own life in January of 1996, shortly after his wife's death. The sequel, titled St. Leibowitz and the Wild Horsewoman, was completed by Bison and published in 1997. And for people who read Canticle and Catholics, this last part is going to blow your mind, because the book touches on topics very close to this real life tragedy. This factoid about the end of Miller's life adds a whole nother depth to the book. All in all, I cannot say enough good things about this book. If you haven't read it yet and are going to give it a read because of this review, let me know in the comments below. Or even if you've read it and you want to reread it or have anything else to add about this book, let me know that in the comments too. This is a small channel and I'm covering like lesser known books, older books that aren't necessarily popular on BookTube. So any interaction helps the channel grow. So like and subscribe, and until next time, read more books. Thank you for watching.